So it's actually and it's the point that Naohiro made at the back, that, you know, statistically significant results, you know, focusing on statistically significant results. It's statistically significant results are more likely to be published. They're more likely to be published quickly. They're more likely to be published in English. They're more likely to be published more than once. They're more likely to be cited by others. There was a nice study of this one, of publishing in English, right? It was a nice study of what German researchers do if they do a clinical trial. So German researchers doing a clinical trial, if they get highly significant results, they would say, ah, great, we can publish this in an English language journal. If they get non-significant results, they say, we can publish this in a German language journal. Isn't that interesting? Do you do the same in Japanese? Do you get, in Japan, if you get a really highly significant result, you think, ah, great, English language journal. Is that a possibility or not? Callistus is nodding his head, but are you, do you agree with him? Nihonjin. It's possibility? Yeah? Okay. So, and all of these biases mean the research literature is really quite a mess, really. Yeah? Because when you come to do a systematic review of the literature, the ones that are not published are the negative results or the non-significant results, so you can't find them. They're either not published at all, or they're not published quickly, or you can't find them because they're published in journals that are not indexed on Medline. You know, it might be on, you know, might be highly significant result, might be sent to PLOS Medicine. Non-significant result might be published in the Journal of the Sendai University. I don't know if there is a Sendai University, but you know, and that journal might not be accessible. They're more likely to be published more than once, and you find them much more easily because lots of people are talking about them. So this is a big problem.
Also, the media also highlights.
Yeah, the media. Or when did you last see, you know, on the news? Oh, important new news. There was no effect of. It just doesn't happen, does it? You know. And the things that get on the news. Pato.
Could you kindly elaborate a little bit more on multiple publication bias? Do you mean it's the same paper which is published in different journals, or people using the same data set to kind of
salami slicing?
Right.
Often it's actually the same study is published more than once. In fact, I've done that. But I don't think it's necessarily a problem as long as you make it clear that it's the same study published more than once. So we published the CRASH 2 trial. We did this big international multi-center randomized trial that showed that this treatment for bleeding reduces mortality in trauma patients. And so we asked the Lancet if our local investigators, say for example, so it comes out in the Lancet, but the doctors in Nigeria who took part in the trial, they can't sometimes access the Lancet. You have to pay for it. So they asked, could we publish it in our local Nigerian medical journal, which is free. And so I asked the Lancet, can they do that? And the Lancet said, yes, they can, as long as they say, this paper first appeared in the Lancet Medical Journal. And so if anybody's reviewing the literature, they'll say, well, that's just one study. Yeah? But often you don't get that. You get the same paper appearing twice, and you really have to be quite a detective to work out that it's the same study. Often what happens is that you get a list of authors, and the order of the authors change. It's almost like they go, well, I'll be the first on this one, and then we'll write another paper that's almost the same but a little bit different, and you can be the first author on that one. Does that answer your question? And there's been some nice research of selective reporting of outcomes. So these are bits of research that have compared. Now, does everybody know what a protocol is? Yeah? A protocol for a randomized trial, or protocol for a study. So a protocol is like a recipe. It's like you say, this is what I'm going to do, and then you have the results, and then this is what we found. So you can compare the protocols and the published reports and see if there's any difference between them. And you find big differences. So you have outcomes in the publication that were not in the protocol. You have outcomes in the protocol that were not in the publication. So 32% of outcomes in the publication not in the protocol. 41% of outcomes in the protocol are not in the publication. But the things that get in the publication are always much more likely to be statistically significant. Yeah? And then Furukawa sensei, he's here, isn't he? Yeah. He did this research. I think this is very nice. He looked at Cochrane systematic reviews with more than 10 trials, and the kind of treatment effect in the trial depended on what proportion of all the trials were included in the analysis. So a median of 46% have included RCTs in each review. So if you find, it's like you do a systematic review, say you find 100 clinical trials, and then you go to how many of those clinical trials actually provided outcome data in the meta-analysis. Well, you know, often it's only a small proportion of them, less than half of them, and that the fewer the trials, the bigger the treatment effect. Yeah? So can you get a sense of that bias? That actually, you know, if there are 100 trials and you find all of the trials, you get close to the right answer. If there are 100 trials and you only get the results for 10 of them, then the answer is likely to be very skewed, very, very biased. Everybody understand that? Okay. So it's, and you know, this is the one that, you know, this is the sort of thing that happens all the time. You have a diabetes trial, and in the protocol you say the primary outcome is this, and then you find, well, oh, it just so happens that was not significant, and then when you look at the publication, the primary outcome is something else, and it happens to be non-significant. Yeah? Now, you know, it happens in... Now, this is interesting, because this is one of our trials. And look at this. It's exactly what I've been talking about. This is our trial of tranexamic acid for postpartum hemorrhage. I told you about this trial yesterday. It's a big trial. In the protocol, we said the primary endpoint was death or hysterectomy. And it turned out that that was not significant. And in the publication, we said the primary outcome, we said the main outcome was death due to bleeding, and that was significant. So I've done it too. So what do you think? Shouldn't do it, should we? I'm a criminal. It sounds reasonable. You're just being kind. You're just being kind. No, you should say, Professor, that's not reasonable. Yeah? Well, I think there is, I think I have got a good excuse. And this is what happened. So halfway through the trial, right, we at the start, when we were planning this trial, we thought the outcome is going to be death or hysterectomy, right? Because we want to stop women dying, and we want to stop, and sometimes, you know, they have to take the uterus out to stop the bleeding, and that's a last resort before death, right? And so we thought death or hysterectomy, that would make sense as an outcome measure. But when we do trials, during the trial, we observe how the trial is going. Right? We go to hospitals and we look, and this is my colleague Halima, and she is in Nigeria, and this is a patient in the trial, and we started to notice there was something going on. So, for example, this is a woman here, lying down here behind this woman, and she's got a postpartum hemorrhage, right? She's delivered her baby, and all of a sudden, she starts to bleed like mad, yeah? The blood's coming really fast. And they put up a blood transfusion, and they say, look, this bleeding is coming really quickly. We'll have to take her for a hysterectomy. And then this lady, the doctor in charge says to this lady, go and get the trial treatment. So the outcome is hysterectomy, but in this case, they've decided on the hysterectomy, and then she goes to get the trial treatment. Yeah? So they've made the decision to do a hysterectomy before they've received the trial treatment. So the trial treatment cannot affect the decision to do a hysterectomy. Do you get that? Yeah? So, you know, and what we found is that this situation was happening a lot. That actually, because everything happens all at the same time, that these women start bleeding really, really quickly. And because they're very anemic, they die really quickly. So the doctors in Africa and Asia know that when a woman's bleeding like mad, you've got to take them to theatre immediately to do a hysterectomy. And it's almost like the patient's on their way to the theatre before they even receive the trial treatment. So we realized, hang on, this is not going to work because we've got this primary endpoint, death or hysterectomy, and most of it has happened before the trial treatment. And so it's going to be the same in both groups. It's going to be biased towards the null. So we realized this, and we wanted to change things while the trial was going. And so we wrote something called a statistical analysis plan, yeah? And we wrote in the statistical analysis plan, we explained our problem is that what we've discovered is women have hysterectomy before they receive the trial treatment, and this won't work, so we're actually going to change the outcome. We're not going to focus on hysterectomy, we're going to change it to death due to bleeding. Because death due to bleeding is the only thing that always happens after the outcome. So I think, you know, even though you were very kind and said it's not too bad in your case, this is what we said in the protocol, this is what we said in the publication, but this is what we said in the statistical analysis plan, yeah? And that was written before knowing what the results showed, yeah? So sometimes, you know, if you do a trial and it runs for 5 years, you decide what you're going to do 5 years ago, and then in 5 years' time you've got lots more information. And so you might want to change things a little bit. And so you can, And that's perfectly all right, I think, as long as it's done without seeing the results. Yeah? So what anything, I think that's good. So if you're going to make any change, it's got to be done blind to the results. Do you get that? Yeah? Because as soon as you've seen the results, you've got the opportunity to be influenced by the results. And you shouldn't. You should make your... so what we did is, this is what we did in the trial. We thought it would be controversial. And so what we did is, what we like to do is be very open about everything and explain everything. And so my son is a filmmaker. He likes making films. So we made a little film that we planned to publish or make available this film at the same time as we made the results of the trial. And so this is the little film we made. I'll show you this.
Yes. Come with me.
Keisatsu.
State your name.
Halima Shakur,
Ian Roberts.
State your profession.
Director of the Woman Trial.
Woman Trial Chief Investigator.
Let me tell you what I do. I work for an independent regulator of medical evidence. We operate based on the assumption that any effectiveness claim that can't be substantiated is audacious. We investigate and we prosecute. So this morning I read that an inexpensive generic drug called tranexamic acid reduces the risk of bleeding to death and postpartum hemorrhage by almost a third. This is the leading cause of maternal death by doctors. And I would suggest this is just blind audacity. Our claim was not audacious. I will be the judge of that.
How old are you?
It's relevant.
He's just a kid. Is this your first job?
I requested your case. Of the 500,000 maternal deaths that occur every year, a quarter of these occur in South Asia. Postpartum hemorrhage being the leading cause of death. So yes, I may be young, but please do not misconstrue my youth for either ignorance or inexperience, as I intend to investigate your claim. Understood?
What do you want to know?
Okay, so as you can imagine, when a copy of the Lancet landed on my desk last week, and lo and behold, I read that down at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, they've trialled this drug, this TXA. Tranexamic acid, that's right. A drug treatment that reduces the risk of bleeding to death and postpartum hemorrhage by almost a third. And I thought, wow, that sounds too good to be true. Which is why this conversation is so important, which is why I requested your case. Because usually when things sound too good to be true, they are.
So, Ms. Shakur, tell me what you do.
I work with doctors and nurses in 21 countries to randomize over 20,000 mothers with severe bleeding to receive tranexamic acid or not.
Originally 15,000.
Sorry?
Well, it was originally 15,000 patients. Can I ask why you would increase the sample size?
Because we wanted a larger sample size to detect an effect on mortality.
See, now, I heard you say that, which brings me on to my next point. The primary outcome wasn't statistically significant now, was it?
Sorry?
Well, you set out to see if tranexamic acid reduced the risk of death or hysterectomy. I mean, look, I given the protocol. You achieved nothing, no effect at all. And then you release this paper here, suggesting that you were expecting this outcome all along. And that very conveniently switches the focus to death, don't you see? And I'm studying something here, Lima, and I'm not liking it.
Well, you're partly correct about the hysterectomy, but
Well, what was it? You know, I'm sensing a little bit of post-hoc data dredging going on here.
Is that an official term, post hoc data dredging? You should know better. You don't have to understand.
I want to, it's really important. I admit we got it wrong on hysterectomy.
What did you get wrong?
Only after the trial started did we realize that many women were being prepared for hysterectomies even before they got the trial treatment.
Halima, I know for a fact that you work very closely with a number of hospitals.
So we made that film, and we thought we could. We had written a protocol, and then we wrote a paper, and the primary endpoint had changed between one and the other, and we wanted to make it clear why, and so we made this little film. Well, my son did, and the interesting thing, nobody would let us publish it. Nobody, you know, the university. We wanted to put it, you know, with our paper, but the Lancet weren't interested, and the university weren't interested either. And it's almost like this sort of openness they don't really like, you know. So anyway, so what I've said so far is things can change from the protocol, but they should not change given a knowledge of the results. Yeah. You should write a statistical analysis plan blind to the results. Now, more evidence of selective reporting harms, right? So the side effects of treatment are very rarely reported. So as a journalist, you know, this is the sort of thing that you would have to ask about, you know, because often you get, you know, well, this fantastic treatment, you know, does this, and so you'll want to know about any adverse effects, you know. You want to know about safety, and safety is often not reported in the paper. So this is the. I'm going to give you an example now of. It's a sort of personal example of all of these, some of these biases that that we've identified, and so we wrote this a few years ago. I don't know, quite a few years ago now, 5 years, 6 years ago, we did a randomized trial called the CRASH 2 trial that showed that this drug, tranexamic acid, reduces the risk of bleeding to death in trauma patients. So if you have a really nasty crash or stab or shooting, if you give this tranexamic acid, it reduces the risk of bleeding to death. And it was a really nice, highly statistically significant reduction in death due to bleeding. And we were very excited about it. And in the UK, the treatment has become very popular. It's gone into all clinical guidelines. But in the United States, they're a little bit more, they don't really like it. And I'm not sure why. But there's a group of trauma doctors in the United States who think that, look, we showed this treatment safe and effective, so we just thought we'll just give it to the patient because it reduces their risk of dying. And this group in the United States seemed to be pointing out all of the problems in doing this. I mean, it's difficult to think of, any problems because it's been shown to be safe and effective, but they think you should only give it to certain patients, and you should do this special diagnostic test first. And so we were invited to make a sort of for and against type series of papers for this medical journal. And then one of my PhD students brought it to attention, an article. and she said, "Oh, Ian, you might be interested in this paper." And so I read this paper, and it said, if we want to speed up progress in science, we should work with our enemies. Yeah? Rather than working with people who agree with you, you should work with people who disagree with you. So I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. Maybe I should do that, you know? Maybe we should work with... And I said, well, these people disagree with me, so let's work with them. So I said to them, look, would you like to have the Crash 2 data set to conduct your analysis on, right? I'll give you all of the data, and you can test your hypothesis on this data, right? I think tranexamic acid's safe and effective for all patients. You think tranexamic acid is dangerous for some patients. Well, if you can find those patients for which it is dangerous in our data, there you are. Go and look for them. Yeah? Do you understand? So I said, well, look, you can have all of the data. You think there's a group of patients who are damaged by this treatment. Go and look for them. And I thought, well, having read my PhD student's article on speeding up the progress of science, I thought this would speed up the progress of science. Do you think so? Or am I naive? No? So I gave them the data. They were delighted. They said, you know, and I said, there's only one thing we must do. There's only one condition. You must specify your analysis before you get the treatment codes. Yeah? So what I did is I sent them all of the data, but without the treatment codes, so they didn't know who was in the treated and untreated group. And I said, right, you plan your analysis now using this data, and then when the analysis is planned, I will send you the codes, and you can test your hypothesis, right? So, yes, they agreed to that. So, I sent them the data. They wrote a statistical analysis plan. I sent them the codes. And then, so this is, you know, they said, we've conducted a preliminary analysis, and here's all of our pre-specified analysis. And so they wrote all of their SAS data code. All of the code was written. And then I gave them the treatment codes, who was in what group, and they did the analysis. And the trouble is, it didn't support their hypothesis. So they had this hypothesis that there are three groups. That there's a group with, well, the hypergroup. The hypergroup, tranexamic acid would be beneficial. The physiological group, tranexamic acid wouldn't have much effect. And the shutdown, tranexamic acid would be harmful. Yeah? So they said, this group, tranexamic acid will be best. This one, it'll have no effect. And this one will be harmful. And then these are the relative risks for death. 0.87, 0.88, 0.87. Well, they're not very different, are they? You know, in fact, you can't really imagine it being more similar. You know, you'd even expect chance to give you a... But anyway, so the results were all of the same. Nevertheless, they wrote a paper, and they started, and they planned to publish this paper in The Lancet. And first they misrepresented this data. They said hyper patients were less likely to die than those who received placebo, right? But no significant difference was detected in this group, and this group. So they said that was statistically significant, but these weren't statistically significant. Well, that's the wrong way to look at subgroups in clinical trials. This might be a bit technical, but when you do a subgroup analysis in clinical trials, you actually want to know, is that, and that different? You're not looking if that's statistical significant and compared to, and that and that. So they misrepresented the results, and then they did this. We also found a significant interaction between shutdown and patients who had received at least one blood product, right? So they did another analysis that wasn't specified in the statistical analysis plan, and that seemed to show, that seemed to confirm their hypothesis, right? So I'm in a difficult position now, aren't I? So I gave them the data. I said the only condition is you write a statistical analysis plan. They wrote a statistical analysis plan. They ran the analysis. It didn't prove their hypothesis, so they did another analysis that wasn't part of their statistical analysis plan that seemed to support their hypothesis. So I pointed out to them, I said, well, look, I said, well, hang on, that analysis wasn't part of your statistical analysis plan. And then it started getting interesting because they wrote back to me, yes, you're correct, of course, that we failed to include the language about these subgroup analysis. And that was an oversight on our part. But we always do these analyses. So it kind of said, well, look, yeah, you're right, we didn't include the words, but we meant to. Yeah? So what do you make of that? The intention is there, because we always have that intention, but we just didn't put the actual, kotoba ganai. So I said, well, look, that's what a statistical analysis plan. It's the words that matter. And then I got different, and then I got another suggestion. He said, well, look, I know, let's throw away that statistical analysis plan and write a new one, a fresh one, I said, you can't do that because you've seen the results. You can't do that. And I said, well, the analysis were not pre-specified. And then I got a different argument. This is the one. I feel we have an ethical obligation to report these subgroup analyses. Yeah? Oh my gosh. This working with your enemies speeds up the progress of science wasn't working for me. They said, look, I know they weren't in the statistical analysis plan, but we've got an ethical obligation, right? Oh no, what do I do? How can I win? Because ethical obligation. Now, if I say no, I'm trying to hide something, yeah? If I say yes, we get this ridiculous subgroup analysis out there in the medical literature. If I say no, they will tell everybody that I'm trying to suppress these results. So my plan to speed up the progress of science was going all wrong. So I took a chance. I feel we have an ethical obligation. And so I said, okay, if you think this is an ethical issue, we should ask the advice of the Research Ethics Committee. If they also think there's an ethical obligation to present these subgroup analyses, then I'm happy to go ahead. Right? So it's a bit risky, isn't it? Because it's the ethical committee of their university. Yeah? Not the ethical committee of my university. But I was hoping that ethics committees will act ethically wherever they are in the world. Yeah? And they did. So I got this lovely response that said, Dr. Roberts asked Dr. Moore to provide the specific analysis that they planned. The plan provided did not include the subset analysis. The specific analysis did not use variables. This is The ethical question of whether and how best to treat trauma patients does not seem to be addressed with scientific rigor. The results outlined are hypothesis generating only, and it said basically they can't publish this. So I was really relieved by that. So they said, no, we don't agree. There's no ethical issue here. The analyses are invalid, and so this, thank goodness for that. It was a happy ending. Well, actually, it wasn't a happy ending. Then they wrote a new paper. I got this new version of the paper, and it had a different. It still was very positive about their hypothesis, but had a different. It was a paper about the benefits of international collaboration and data sharing. I couldn't believe it. I said, hang on, we've just had a dispute. You just lied to me. And we had to get the ethics committee to rule on this. And now you write this paper about how harmonious and lovely everything is. I said, it's not true. You have to write, tell the truth. Tell them we had a disagreement. Write that down. And then all communication has stopped. I haven't heard from them since, right? So now what they're going to do, they've won in the end, haven't they? Because what will they do? It didn't support their hypothesis. So they're not going to publish, are they? Yeah? So what do you think I should do? So it's selective reporting in the end, isn't it?